Hi, you're watching us on NewsX and NewsX YouTube. My name is Rishabh. With me is my colleague Gauri. And let us now examine what's going to happen if the inevitable Pakistan going bankrupt, which is happening as we speak, does take place. So when the country goes bankrupt, Gauri, what's likely to then happen? What's the impact?
What does that
aftermath?
mean, Rishabh? Does Pakistan now have to sell their assets to China, their ports, their projects to China?
Okay, so
is that a solution?
So let me put it this way. Eventually, when you're out of money, what do? Right? And if you take it in a very private scenario, if you're out of money, you have to sell assets. You sell your car, you can sell your house, you can sell jewelry or assets that you have.
Right.
As a country, if you're out of money, the first port of call was Pakistan to get loans. So they got loans from Saudi Arabia, they got loans from the UAE, and they got loans from China. Now they've already gotten the loans, money's run out, kharch, finished. Okay, that money's also being spent.
Gone, yeah.
So these guys are not going to give you indefinite loans.
Right.
So the first tranche, you say, okay, it's a loan. Second tranche, well, what am I buying off you? So what has Pakistan got for sale? The first obvious thing that's going to be sold off is the Gwadar port.
Right.
Now, parallel already exists in Hambantota in Sri Lanka.
Sri Lanka, right.
Where basically the loan got converted into shares, equity.
Correct.
So therefore, now the government of China owns the Hambantota port for 99 years in Sri Lanka. So you can expect that the government of China, the Chinese companies already have a free trade agreement for the Gwadar port that they are building. You can presume that they will soon own it.
So will China own it? Will they have actual power over that?
Same logic, 99 years, it becomes personal property. So the X number of thousand of acres around the Gwadar port become Chinese property on lease rental for 99 years or something like that. So the first thing that's going to go is that. Then subsequently, you're looking to sell off other CPEC assets, where right now the Chinese would be partial equity holders and they would be built on Chinese loans.
Correct.
So that they remain Pakistani sovereign state-owned projects. You can imagine that then the Chinese, you turn the debt into equity.
Yeah.
Therefore, the Chinese companies and the Chinese government become owners of those projects. And with the projects come large parcels of land, because you can't build a highway without a parcel of land. You can't build a dam without a huge parcel of land.
And what happens to the rupee? What happens to their currency, Rishabh?
If you have to go to the IMF, and this is one of the preconditions of the IMF, then you have to devalue the Pakistani rupee. You devalue the Pakistani rupee, it has a ripple effect. You're looking at right now the Pakistani rupee is, let's say, 1 Indian rupee is worth 2 Pakistani rupees. Okay, that's roughly the
conversion.
Conversion. So you're looking at devaluation where that hits maybe 1 Indian rupee is worth 3 or 4. You're looking at a very, very large, not a 5-6% devaluation. You're looking at a 30, 40, 50, 100% devaluation, which is going to be a huge sociological, psychological impact for when that happens to Pakistan. But if you want that IMF loan, a part of this will have to become inevitable.
And does that mean there will be hyperinflation? There will be a lot of inflation in Pakistan?
Almost inevitably. In fact, you've heard the Pakistani finance minister, I'll have to say now the ex-finance minister, because he's been sacked, talking about the fact that they have managed to avoid double-digit inflation. Double-digit inflation is not what you're looking at. You're looking at hyperinflation. Hyperinflation goes into the hundreds of percents per year. In Zimbabwe, hit 1,000,000%, which means the rates in the shops don't go up every month, they go up every hour.
Okay.
So if you're buying a piece of bread for 100 rupees, an hour later is 150 rupees, 2 hours later is 200 rupees. So that hyperinflation, it's a temporary thing for any economy, but it can happen, and Pakistan is in very serious danger of seeing hyperinflation taking
but
place.
it can lead to severe impact on the GDP, right? So GDP
Pakistan's
growth
GDP
rate
is already slowed down. Their predictions, their own government predictions are lower growth this year and much lower growth next year. Obviously, you don't have the money, you're tightening belts. You're tightening belts, which means you're spending less on capital infrastructure, you're spending less investing into the economy, and Pakistan remains a highly state-run economy. In fact, their biggest company is an army company. It's called the Fauji Corporation. So the army literally owns a lot of the Pakistani economy. So you're seeing tightening of belts, which has a dramatic effect on GDP growth, which creates a vicious circle.
So what does that mean for their imports then? Will they be able to buy stuff, especially defense equipment, especially
I don't know how to use or define the future of Pakistani imports without using expletives. But let's say they're in a lot of trouble. So the Pakistani imports are already hammered. Now some of the imports are inelastic, which are things like petrol, oil. Oil is inelastic. You need it just to keep your economy going, right? So some of the elastic imports, luxury goods, Imran Khan has already cracked down on. He's cut down on cheese imports, for example, for the rich elite of Pakistan. But so the inelastic imports you can do nothing about. Rest of the imports, you've had it. And when it comes to one fundamental thing that concerns us, let's be frank, is the Pakistani ability to have foreign exchange to buy defense equipment and not just new planes and new tanks and new ships, which cost a lot of money. But I'm talking about basic things like munitions, buying bullets, buying mortars, buying
Correct.
artillery shells, many of which are being exhausted because of this all this firing that's going on the LOC. They don't have the money to replace them now. Simple
But
as
they
that.
do need some help, right? They will have to rely on their trading partners. They cannot survive without that. And what does that mean for India? Will they have to rely on India?
When Imran Khan became prime minister, one thing he accepted that for the Pakistani economy to avoid bankruptcy, they needed greater trade with India. Unfortunately, because of what Pakistan has been doing, and we know what Pakistan does when it comes to terror, not only will there be not any greater trade with India, we already imposed 200% import tariffs, which means even things like cement, which was shipped from India or via the Wagah-Atari border, brought into India and sold here in Punjab and Haryana, that's gone. And very recently, as we speak, LOC, cross-border LOC trade is also gone.
been stopped,
Now, the
yeah.
cross-border LOC trade cutting off is important for two reasons. Number one, it hits the legal economy, which is actual the value of the trade of goods that are being brought over. Number two, hits the drugs economy, because along with the
Right.
goods, you were smuggling in drugs. And number
narcotics.
three, it hits the fake currency
Terrorism,
economy.
yeah.
Fake currency economy, and of course that immediately hits the terror economy. And unfortunately, in Pakistan, you have to look at terror as an economy also.
So what does that mean for Pakistan globally? What is their reputation?
Their reputation is already okay. Let's put it this way: where does your reputation comes from? If you're a small country, your reputation has to come from either you're seen as a raw material supplier, or your reputation comes from your ability to run a developed economy. For example, a Sweden or a Norway are very small countries, but they have high per capita income. They have high, low Gini indexes, which means low inequality, high happiness indexes, life satisfaction indices. So that these are developed economies, but very small economies. So Pakistan is a very small economy. It's not a developed economy. It's already a pariah state when it comes to security matters. Once the economic clout, which is soft power, declines drastically, where you're no longer having soft power, you're begging.
Right.
Right, so it's other persons. So when you beg to the Saudis, they want something in return. When you beg to go to Dubai and beg, they want something in return. When you go to the Chinese and beg, they want something in return. So it's the reversal of soft
Right.
power which happens when your economy fails.
So China essentially owning their assets is something which is likely
so
to
you
happen.
can look at total dependence on the Saudis and Chinese. So
Yeah.
what the Saudis want or the Chinese wants is what Pakistan is going to do. Therefore, our diplomatic pushes in dealing with Pakistan will have to be through Saudi Arabia and through China, which has already been happening.
You talked about CPEC earlier. What is the area which China is likely to claim?
Look, we talked about the projects
Right.
that are likely to go. So you're talking about thousands of acres, maybe
Yeah.
hectares of land to go along with the projects, right? But China's already done this one example with the Central Asian Republic, where they wrote off their debt in return for 1,400 square kilometers of land. We already know that there is a Chinese presence, a true presence in Gilgit-Baltistan, which is technically Indian soil.
Correct.
It is highly likely, very likely, highly probable that you could see Pakistan sell off, and they've done this in the past. Sell off a large part of Gilgit-Baltistan, which is technically Indian soil, give it to the Chinese.
Chinese.
And you're talking about Gilgit-Baltistan is roughly about 70,000 square kilometers in size. So you're looking at a huge chunk, literally
Yeah.
a territory being
Yeah.
handed over to China in return for the waiver of debts. You're looking at that scales, and these are probable things. These are not hypothetical things, very probable things to happen.
So these are the things which will happen. But what about Pakistan as a country? What about Pakistan internally? What are the socio-political implications?
Here is where it becomes complicated. So you'd think when an economy suffers, there would be a popular rejection
Of the regime.
of the establishment.
Yeah.
But the problem in Pakistan is that the popular rejection of the establishment is directed towards the civilian establishment. So
Yeah.
Imran Khan is going to get hammered. Okay, he's already why is he sacked his finance minister? Because he knows
It's going to come down to him.
It's going to eventually the buck stops with him, right?
Yeah.
So the Naya Pakistan is not happening. It's never going to happen. So Imran Khan is going to get hammered, but the army will preserve its control, and this is the problem. In fact, the worse the Pakistani economy does, the more likely for an army stranglehold to increase, and this then becomes the tragedy of Pakistan, that rather than a popular revolt turning against the army, in times of crisis, the army becomes a port of call and is seen as the area of strength and stability, not only in terms of the defense of the country, which of course the Pakistani army keeps failing at. 71 war is an example. They lost in 13 days. but also the economy of the country, because the army has I mentioned the Fauji Corporation has a grip over the Pakistani economy.
So you're completely ruling out a popular revolt.
Can't rule it out, can't be that predictive, but past history tells us that economic crisis in Pakistan is generally not an anti-army revolt. It only leads to civilian churns, which is why you're talking about these civilian leaders being accused of corruption. Because when people are in economic trouble and they see these people, oh, you have a flat in London, look how rich Nawaz is.
Right.
You direct it in there. How rich the Pakistani generals are,
Nobody
you don't
talks
see
about.
talks about.
Yeah. So that was a very fairly comprehensive explainer of what happens if Pakistan goes bankrupt. For more such videos, subscribe to NewsX YouTube and hit the bell icon.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.